South Korea plans to help victims of forced labor during Japan's occupation of the country from 1910 to the end of World War II by paying them with a pool of money from both South Korean and Japanese corporations. Seoul has also announced it will stop a complaint it had previously filed against Japan at the World Trade Organization. There are reasons why the two countries are trying to build better relations, which we will go into in a moment. But critics say it's coming at a cost, downplaying the trauma Japan inflicted. Here's the story of one elderly Korean woman recalling the hardships of those years.
In her recent autobiography, 92-year-old South Korean Yang Gum-duk sets the record straight and describes in detail her experience as a forced laborer for Japan's doomed war machine. At age 15, she was lured from Japanese colonial Korea to mainland Japan with the promise of opportunity her family could not afford.
The Japanese principal said I could go to junior high school if I went to Japan. My father said he was lying and wouldn't allow it, but I snuck away. Once in Japan, I never even saw the school door. I was taken straight to Mitsubishi Industries, where I was worked nearly to death. I had wanted to be a teacher.
Yang worked at the Mitsubishi plant in Nagoya from June 1944 to October 1945.
A bell woke us at 6 a.m. and we went to the camp to work, 8 or 10 hours. They made me paint aeroplanes. They didn't have a ladder for us, so I used wide planks, climbed up and painted. The pail of paint was too heavy for me, and so to this day, one shoulder still hurts. We had lunch at noon. They gave us each a ball of rice, but after 5 bites, it was gone, and then we had to go back to work. I was always hungry.
Several of her school friends died in Japan. Yang still recalls the harsh smell of the factory and sleepless nights.
Sometimes we couldn't sleep because of the bombing. We had to spend all night in the air raid shelter, and even when we came out, we could still hear the sounds of bombs over and over. Then in the morning, we had to go back to work.
That was forced labor survivor Yang Gum-duk. Testimonies like hers have garnered great public sympathy in South Korea. President Yoon Suk-yeol's approval ratings have been low, and this move to patch things up with Japan may make him even less popular. But he believes it's necessary. It's a move that looks to the future while trying to put the past behind.
There's hardly anyone left who remembers firsthand Japan's brutal rule of the Korean peninsula in the early 1900s. But some victims and their families say they're still waiting for compensation and an apology. Under a new plan from Seoul, victims of forced labour during Japan's occupation will be compensated through a foundation that's funded by South Korean companies, instead of direct payments from the Japanese firms that profited. Some victims, as well as opposition groups, have condemned the proposal.
The Yoon Suk-yeol government is pushing ahead with pro-Japanese trade negotiations that trample on the established legal rights of its citizens and exempt Japanese war criminal enterprises from legal responsibility.
The new plan replaces a ruling from South Korea's Supreme Court in 2018 that ordered the Japanese companies to pay. Tokyo has maintained that the issue of compensation was resolved through a 1965 treaty that laid out post-World War II diplomatic ties. But it's remained one of the longest-running rows between the two nations and has contributed to trade disputes. South Korea's Conservative President Yoon Suk-yeol has made strengthening ties with Japan a top priority since he took power in May 2022, and Tokyo has welcomed the move.
Japan and South Korea are important neighbours to each other who must cooperate in dealing with various challenges in the international community. The two countries and their leaders have communicated closely since the launch of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration.
There's been pressure to end the dispute from afar too. As major allies to the United States, Washington has been pushing for a resolution. With looming regional challenges like North Korea and China's growing power, goodwill between Tokyo and Seoul is seen as crucial for a united front.
We have Robert Ward, Senior Fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Thanks for joining us. Robert, as the report mentioned, South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol is conservative, which tends to mean someone who is pretty nationalistic. And yet it looks like he's trying to set this wartime grievance aside. What's driving that?
Well, I think it's important to remember this is one of the most pro-Japan governments in Korea for many, many years. I'd argue perhaps since Kim Dae-jung was president in 1998 to 2003. So this is an important initiative by President Yoon. He's aware that he's got a sort of limited shelf life. South Korean presidents can only be in office one term. He's got government legislative elections next year, 2024. So his window for changing things with regards to the Japanese relationship is pretty small. So I think he's trying to make use of the time that he has to push this relationship forward.
I want to play comments from both South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Have a listen.
It's clear that future-orientated cooperation between South Korea and Japan will preserve freedom, peace and prosperity, not only for the two countries, but also for the entire world.
Considering the current international situation and their strategic environment, I recognise the importance of cooperation between Japan and South Korea, and between Japan, the United States, and South Korea.
Robert, how valid are Japan's and South Korea's concerns about China?
Well, China is enormous. It is making its influence felt in every sphere, from the economy to security issues, particularly down in the East China Sea, but also in the South China Sea. So for both Japan and South Korea, what China's doing is worrying. Obviously, for Japan, they are doing lots of reforms in terms of boosting defense spending, investing in new military kit, and so on. South Korea itself has just come out with an Indo-Pacific strategy, which is a welcome development for the Indo-Pacific more broadly. So I think one of the interesting things, though, is that what is going on in Ukraine, so Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has, I think, spurred Japan and South Korea, in addition to the issues with China, obviously they're related as well, to try to push the improvement in the relations and try to sort of accelerate this improvement. Both sides are worried about Taiwan. Both sides are worried about Chinese coercion more broadly in the region. And of course, for regional stability, the cooperation between Japan and South Korea is absolutely essential. Both are allies of the US. So this sort of triangular cooperation is absolutely critical for the ability of the US and the like-minded to support the rules-based order in the region.
What do you expect will be potential avenues of cooperation, as you say, between the two over the next few years?
Well, clearly, big area of cooperation in security issues. The two, Japan and South Korea, before the relations chilled a couple of years ago, there was some cooperation. It would be good, very welcome, I think, from the US point of view, if that cooperation were deepened, so that the triangular relationship was put on a more stable footing. There are good signs on the Japanese side that this is what they want. In the December 22 new national security strategy, very importantly, Japan refers to South Korea as an important interlocutor for Japan, important not only geopolitically but also to Japan's security. So I think there is some sort of optimism in the Japanese government that this relationship can be deepened. I think from Japan's point of view as well, they would welcome more South Korean involvement in the Indo-Pacific. Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific concept is very important in terms of sort of framing Japan's foreign policy towards the region. There had been a sort of South Korea-shaped hole in the Indo-Pacific network, but President Yoon is trying to fill that out. So it'll be interesting to see how much cooperation there is within the Indo-Pacific framework as well. It's encouraging, for example, that South Korea also is joining the talks for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that the US launched last year as well. So it's all pointing in the right direction, but as ever with this bilateral relationship, relations are sort of strained in other areas. So one thing to watch is just how sustainable this improvement is.
Now, China won't like any of this. I wonder if any of Beijing's concerns are valid.
Well, if you're sitting in Tokyo, you're looking at what China's doing in around Taiwan. You're looking at the constant intrusions in and around the Senkaku Islands, what China calls the Diaoyu Islands. So there's a lot of sort of sustained concern in Tokyo about what China's doing. If you're sitting in Seoul, of course, you're looking northwards to Pyongyang, and you're saying that North Korea is sort of accelerating its WMD program, constantly testing missiles and the like. And that, of course, is also a concern for Japan too. So Japan and Korea will frame this as an increase in the deterrence capability, in the credibility of deterrence capability, just to ensure that that they can influence the calculations, potential negative calculations towards them in Pyongyang and Beijing. But of course, Pyongyang and Beijing will complain about this, and they obviously, as we saw recently, complained about the defense reforms that Japan is initiating.
Robert Ward, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.